The first level of Onimusha Dawn of Dreams presents you with a question when a 200-foot samurai robot firing bullets from its tits starts shooting you. Are you prepared for Onimusha to be absolute nonsense now, in exchange for some pretty fun action where you can launch a zombie with a broadsword and then summon in a boxer to air juggle him? The intimate exploration and delicate atmosphere of the first couple titles is launched away higher than the enemies in this game, as we have tag team duos here summoning the power of the gods to carpet bomb giant combat arenas. The big addition here is the partner system. Now usually you'll be accompanied by a teammate who you can issue some basic commands to or switch control over to on the fly. Initially it's easy to not pay it too much attention, to basically just use the partner switch as an opportunity to continue the fight as your other character, while commanding the other to rest and heal if they're low on health. But it's getting cheeky with this system where some of the most fun with the game can be had. Position your characters appropriately and you can sustain some pretty cool combos, juggling an enemy between your two heroes. You can switch at any point, so if you trigger some big showy move with one character, you can switch to the other so you're not just sat there watching a long attack animation, putting the potential for even more damage output on the table. Even if you're telling a character to interact in some way with the environment, you can switch. If it involves some animation you don't want to sit through, I like that. Onimusha's counter system is back, and I swear they've made it easier to do again since I'm pulling off its trickiest variants so consistently. You can of course also still do timed follow-up strikes after a counter to speed around the area delivering critical hits. What's cool is that you can get your partner into the mix, calling them in to perform strikes of their own in between yours, no matter how far away they are. Check this out, I'm timing a series of flurries on these enemies all the way over here, and by asking my partner to join in, she'll perform a critical strike on the foe she's fighting in the distance. Keen players can command their partner to block and fall back almost instantly, so it's worth keeping an eye on both characters to maximize damage input while making sure nobody dies. That said, the camera system doesn't always make keeping an eye on your friend easy. Unlike previous Oni games, you now have control over the camera in most areas, but it's not great, it's really zoomed in, and while you can move it left and right, up and down is very limited. Ideally, it would have been good to have a more versatile camera, maybe a bit more zoomed out, that you could use to keep the other character easily on screen, for commanding them to block and attack at a moment's notice. Even the fixed camera of the previous titles would arguably have been better for having both characters on screen at once. What you get is a half-baked attempt at a controllable camera that doesn't fully feel fit for purpose. Even when fighting one-on-one, it can cause problems, because my character is so big in the middle of the screen, it's hard to tell what the enemy in front of them is even doing. You may recognize this camera system because while Onimusha took a year off in 2005, the team didn't and released Shadow of Rome before Onimusha returned with Dawn of Dreams in 2006. It's an action game not set in feudal Japan, but rather in ancient Rome, or as Italians like to call it, the past. I actually considered doing a full video on this game, but I wasn't really feeling it. The combat focuses on degradable weapons that you have to switch out and quickly source on the battlefield, but this scrappy form of play wasn't really suiting the slow and lumbering soldier you play as. Half the game also revolves around stealth segments, and while there seem to be some creative ideas at play there, I don't know if I'm up for a game with such a whiplash in gameplay styles between levels while I'm in this samurai action mood I've been in lately. Also, unlike in Onimusha, there's no magical retconning in the historical events. No Shinigami Caesar, no Agrippa the Ripper, what's the point? Well, the point eventually became taking that weapon degradation system and using it for Dead Rising. In the meantime, let's give Onimusha a controllable camera in Dawn of Dreams, which, let's be real, does diminish the franchise's style considerably. Gives the title a very uniform look no matter where you are in the game, and since your control of the camera is still relatively limited, it's not like you can create your own interesting angles, or just on a practical level get a better look at things. So this is quite a different flavor of Onimusha, right? But at least our friends at Capcom took the number out of the title to soften the blow of all of these changes. This isn't real Onimusha, it isn't meant to be, right? Well, I don't know, I think everyone, Capcom and players, are kidding themselves a little there. Putting aside the fact that Capcom have never shied away from making radical changes in a numbered sequel, what does everyone think the plan was going to be, huh? If this hadn't been the last Onimusha they made. That an Onimusha with fixed camera angles set in a spooky pagoda was going to release a year later, and they would have called that Onimusha 4? Get real, guys. Even in the noughties, there was no going back to the style of the first few games. not with so many critics taking shots at fixed camera angles, and even today they're not exactly beloved either, which is a shame, but it is what it is. This was the next Onimusha. Let's not pretend, everyone. A Dawn of Dreams carries on from the sequel tease of only 3, and has probably the most conclusive ending of any of the games, so to pitch this as some wacky spin-off to smooth things over with the fans is just kinda silly, because it means less people are gonna play it. And back in 2006 when it came out, it didn't seem like a lot of people did play it. Starting Dawn of Dreams is one thing though, finishing it is another entirely. There was an effort made here to make an Onimusha game much longer than the prior titles, which were fairly short, and you certainly get that. This monster comes on 2 DVDs, and took me nearly 24 hours to beat. And let me tell you, making the game this long was not worth it. To get to this point, Dawn of Dreams is thinly spread, presentation is a little all over the place. Camera angles aside, environmental detail and visual design feel inconsistent across the large array of levels. Some have the detail and style you'd expect, while others are a bit simple and dull. There's a castle level with secret rooms and traps, and it looks really bland. Combined with the lack of dramatic camera angles or interesting lighting, it makes it one of the most boring stages in the game. And no matter how much you're willing to accept an Onimusha with crazier action, the castle level being one of the least interesting in an Onimusha game does kinda suck to say. A lot of what probably should have been cutscenes get switched out for still images with text. The game really likes to do this after boss fights. Yeah, you got him, but then the gang was surrounded, I guess. Oops. The game often recycles its own levels, recycles some levels from 3 even, all to create an exhausting game that stretches itself out way beyond what was necessary. I don't know if this has anything to do with that, but all the animated cutscenes that are here are rendered out as these compressed files, but more annoyingly, all seem to have this weird hazy tint to them that make them look like ungraded footage or something. While on the subject of presentation, the soundtrack is quite good. It often goes for a more rocky, grungy sound, with eastern strings and war drums popping up in the background here and there. The issue for me is that a lot of these more pumped up tracks are a little too energetic and fast paced. Despite all the wild stuff you can do, doesn't really reflect the combat, which isn't slow, but isn't exactly fast-paced either. So I feel a bit of a mixed mood sometimes. Also, listen to this. They have one sample disc at Capcom. To accommodate this new length, the game feels the need to include a far more tedious and long-winded upgrade system, where you have a million little slots to upgrade the power of certain moves and 10 trillion different swords with different attributes you can dump XP into. There's a shop system where you can buy and sell weapons and health items, as well as an unending list of equipable accessories with different attributes. It all lends to a huge amount of busy work in between stages, where you try to optimize yourself and your up to 4 companions. This process slowly trickles in higher stats for you over the course of 20 hours, lending a rather shallow, extra sense of progression to things. Of course, if you put points into the wrong place, like a party member who leaves the team for a bit for story reasons, or you opted not to invest in a new sword with lower stats at the time, but that could have been upgraded into a better sword than your current one, it means you can blunder your way into fights with enemies who barely take damage from you, because regardless of your skill at the combat, they're expecting you to have done your level up homework too. Accessories can be your saving grace in these moments. Some will up attack and drop defense, others will do the opposite. Some will help power up partners or make health drops more likely. In some later fights, I actually started switching accessories out mid-fight to maximize my odds, putting on attack rings when there was an opening and switching them off for more defensive items when falling back. You could argue this is a nice touch of strategy, and in a turn-based RPG game where your interactions with both inventory and combat are both based on menus, I'd probably agree. But in a real-time action game, it's a lot of stop and start, going back and forth between twitch reflexes and menus mid-fight. Stats aren't the only things you can unlock. There are a few extra moves for each character to unearth, more powerful magic attacks to get. Though a lot of the sword moves you unlock don't exactly flow together all that well, they're more exciting to get than a statistic boost. Here's what I would have done. Cut the game in half, remove the repeated content so we can polish up the levels and get rid of the still image cutscene replacements, chuck the upgrade system, and put the focus on unlocking new moves and experimenting with your party members teaming up in combat. You'd have a much better game. If we're talking tedium, I'm not a big fan of this game's simple but often dragged out puzzle segments either. As you might expect, each character you bring with you has little environmental abilities that they can use to get somewhere in the level others can't. A process which can often take some time when you need to go to a save point to do the switch, or when the answer is glaringly obvious and carrying out the solution is just tedious. You don't have to half put up with some silly shit in games with these kind of puzzles. Oh, however will we get up there? How will we climb this ledge without the ladder fully retracted? An impossible feat. You know, entering a small gap with one character or using a grapple hook with another doesn't feel that different, really, when it's just a canned animation you press circle to activate. It's lucky that in combat, most of these characters do have quite a different feel to them. Soki has these strong, satisfying broadswords. Akane has short reach, but is super fast. Tenkai has a nimble dodge, yet reach with his spear. Roberto can duck and weave, countering with sick flurries. Onohatsu has a machine gun. She is definitely the most broken character. Having trouble fighting? Switch to her and let the other character block and heal, and pile the damage on from a mile away. There's really nothing the average enemy can do. Action games can struggle to incentivize creative play sometimes, when slower and less flashy but safer strategies exist to fall back on. But Ohatsu takes it to a whole new level. You're basically playing a whole different game when you switch to her, a very easy and rather boring shooter with lock-on. No matter how used to the changes this series has gone through over the years you are, you will still wonder how we got here to this gameplay. She can be upgraded to do a lot of damage with her gun too. It's not just chip damage. And in these big levels, there's plenty of room to play keep away. Where'd she get a machine gun anyway? Isn't it a little early for that type of gun? Luckily, there's enough scenarios where she isn't around, or her cheese isn't effective for whatever reason, to not let her break the game entirely. But she will be calling to you in a lot of levels, far too often if you're struggling. Each character basically represents a separate weapon set, and I think one could make the argument that splitting them all off into separate characters, instead of just having one character who can switch between 5 weapons, is unnecessarily cumbersome. To have to do this thing where you wrangle 2 characters at a time to combo on an enemy, switching back between them. If I was reviewing this game on release, I might be more inclined to agree with that. But since I'm in the future, and Capcom did eventually make a game where you can instantly switch between a sword weapon, a spear weapon, and boxing gloves that let you duck and weave, I'm not going to act indignant that Dawn of Dreams didn't try for that. And like I said, there's a lot of fun satisfaction in getting both characters into doing something cool. It makes you think a little differently to the average action game, and a little diversity in the genre is no bad thing, right? Though if we are going to have a guy running around feudal Japan punching guys, I think we can all agree jumping at this point wouldn't really be out of place in this series' combat. Just a little hop, you know, I don't know. I think also it would have been nice to be able to switch out companions at any moment, rather than just at save points. Even if it was still the case that only 2-player characters could be on screen at once, I think that would pick up the pace of things and make it more enticing to experiment with everybody. I mean, it would only really come at the cost of, like, a couple puzzles having to be changed, which is no big deal to me. But anyway, who are all these guys, you're probably wondering. Well, 15 years after Onimusha 3, Hideyoshi, that one guy who would pop up here and there in the original trilogy up to something, has allied with the demons and is in charge of Japan, continuing Nobunaga's efforts to unify the country under one banner. You play as Soki, Hideyoshi's adopted son, who collects a band of misfits to take him on before the demon forces he's consorting with engulf not just the country, but the world. Soki is a lot more fun than the average Onimusha protagonist.
O great and noble warrior, I beseech you to spare your precious time. Would you just drop the goods and go home?
What? He's a little cheeky, expresses more emotion over what's going on. I'm not saying all action heroes have to be yucking it up or shouting about their problems, but it's definitely good to have someone with a little more passion at the forefront for a change, showing a wider range of emotions. He's pretty likable from the get-go. The guy who could have taken a place alongside the bad guys as the son of their leader, but chose to rise up instead, even if at the start it's just him traveling the wastes, getting into scraps. Though I'd argue he could have done with a few more cool moments in the middle of the journey, rather than those being more relegated to the start and the end, as he spends a lot of cutscenes just, worrying about people and looking concerned. This is very much a power of friendship kind of plotline. It's a lot more light-hearted fantasy than, say, Onimusha 2.
It's quite dangerous to travel this road alone.
Which in retrospect comes off a lot grittier with its more tortured, world-weary cast of characters. Those guys felt more like the kind of morally ambiguous types you might meet on the battlefield in Japan 500 years ago, but your teammates in this game are a lot more idealistic and heroic. There's no gift system like in 2 to get different scenes, the outcomes are predetermined here, but you can get to know your teammates more between missions by talking to them about various subjects. This is where the setting shines through as the game pulls from history to give these characters some nice texture. Like Roberto the boxer, a half-Spanish Christian who was persecuted and discriminated against in Japan. Something which, as you might expect, informs his character a great deal. Maldición! It's a shame the game never manages to quite make me care for the team as they become a single unit of ass-kickers. Text boxes and conversations that focus heavily on exposition about the wacky rules of demon power and how they're summoned don't help build up the connection between these characters as well as they could have. And then there's a lot of these kind of conversations. Plus, a lot of time is spent on Soki and Ohatsu's relationship more than all the other characters, which isn't as important for the group dynamic since they know each other from before the game. When at the end the team is talking a big game about their unbreakable bond, it doesn't feel like the game has put quite enough effort into getting us to that point. The gameplay alone can't suffice on that front when you only have 2 characters in battle at once. There needs to be more cutscenes and dialogue building up this team dynamic for the triumphant friendship saves the day stuff at the end. This all said, I have to respect the finale of Dawn of Dreams, because it goes very hard. This game has one of the most insane final boss gauntlets in any action game that gives everyone a nice little moment. It's probably not really a spoiler to reveal that Tenkai is Samanosuke, the lead from game 1 and 3. I mean, they play his theme tune when the character first shows up, and he's the only mysterious old guy you meet. He's actually a little more interesting to me when he's not the main character. This old noble warrior that's seen it all but carries on fighting into his 70s, lending you his wisdom. He seems almost out of time and out of place around these youngsters, with his more old-fashioned stoic demeanor. It makes his continued efforts to fight in a changing world all the more admirable. There's a bit near the end where Soki calls a demon a sack of shit, and Samanosuke is really impressed, like it would never occur to him to do that in his 50 years battling evil.
Unbelievable.
Certainly.
He's into it. Having Samanosuke here alongside this fresh group of demon fighters, some descended from past heroes in the series, in an all-out multiple hour-long final chapter where they face down a number of villains, does give a shape to these 4 games in a nice conclusive way, with not just the battle these people and their ancestors have been waging against the demons for decades finally climaxing, but also it happening as the Warring States era of Japan comes to a close. Even the historical setting of Onimusha is at an end here. Ending a series that has so often focused on warriors teaming up, on a finale that really focuses on the team effort, I think is really fitting for the franchise, even though this game could have put in more work to get us there in a satisfying way. All in all, it's still hard to recommend Dawn of Dreams. Everything fun or interesting about it is buried under a mountain of padding and busywork. At the time of release, maybe doing everything possible to extend the playtime made for a good value at full price. But get it now on the cheap and how thinly spread things are is definitely going to be off-putting. You're going to be far too exhausted, I think, after beating the game, to go on another round to max everything out or try the extras. There's even a cheat code to unlock co-op play, where another human player can control the second character with another controller. As a secret, it's not meant as the intended way to play, and after all there is a variety of pivotal moments where you don't have any companions, but you can't deny that's not cool to just throw in. While 2 well-coordinated players could potentially forge some cool co-op combos without the stopping and starting of the character switch button, it does come at the cost of being able to let one character heal by switching to the other, so it comes with new challenges altogether. While neat, I do find that the satisfaction from this game's combat largely does come from feeling like you've managed to coordinate 2 characters into doing something cool by yourself, which is something that set this game apart from the competition at the time. Of course, it's also not the game to recommend to someone who was looking for the mood and atmosphere of those first 2 titles. If Onimusha were to come back today though, it's that original mood that I think would be the best to recapture. 6 or 7 years ago I would have suggested Onimusha come back as a badass action samurai epic, but since then, weirdly, we've had a lot of those, with more to come. Today it would be really cool to see an Onimusha that goes back to the more intimate, almost horror-like tone of the original. Imagine a game today where you play as a lone Japanese swordsman who enters a mysterious stronghold at night, fighting off demons and grisly creatures, and maybe discovering an ancient evil buried beneath. I'd play that. Which is kind of awkward, because I'm basically signing off here by asking the next game to be the opposite of the one I just talked about. But hey, that doesn't mean this game is bad. It's just an example of a franchise trying to find its place in an at the time vibrant action landscape. The growing pains are clear, but if I'm gonna give Dawn of Dreams anything, even if it wasn't a smashing success in execution, they at least offered something different to those other action titles out at the time. If you play it, you'll just have to dig deep to get to those parts.